I am glad you were able to be here with me today as I go through some of the things that I do when I do work with Encaustics. Encaustics is basically painting with wax. The encaustic medium is made up of beeswax and a percentage of damar resin that allows the beeswax to harden so that it's not so soft. Here I will show you some panels that I'm using for creating some work. Some of them are made with bookboard actually, and are coated with encaustic gesso, which has a level of absorbency to it. Another thing you can use is an encaustic board. Um, this this ones here are ones that I had covered with chalk chalk paint and then put a couple of layers of encaustic uh, paint on it into it. Here's we start the transformation of the bare table to start getting the workspace ready for this kind of work. Here's some scraping tools that I will be using, followed by just images of um, some of the heat guns that I use. A bigger one to melt the wax, and also a smaller one for finer detail. The encaustic medium needs to be melted. Here I use a small skillet so that I could have enough encaustic medium to work with different panels. I also have a basically it's a pancake griddle, which was which is used to be able to heat up my brushes so that they're warm when they're applied to the medium. One of the things that happens with the whole thing in terms of encaustics is that because the medium needs to be heated up and melted, the amount of time that it takes to for it to harden again is pretty quick. So the idea of having a warm brush to dip into the warm wax and then dip it into a warm board allows for the wax to be applied on it in a much smoother way. Because one of the things that happens when wax is uh, it kind of cools down, it hardens, and then you really can't apply it. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that you don't want the wax to start fuming, because then those fumes are toxic for you. So it's a good idea to always make sure to keep your encaustic medium at the temperature of 180 to 200 Fahrenheit. This allows us so that it melts and it's in a safe place. That's the other reason that you also have the fans. Uh, the exhaust fan is one. I also keep another fan that is rotating in my office, so to allow for the circulation of the air in the flow of um, the fumes that come out that are not toxic. Here I am working with trying to just kind of figure out how I'm going to start this day in terms of working with encaustics. I am looking at my boards. I'm trying to figure out, which ones do I want to work with first. Once the panels are heated up, really I'm taking both of them and just gently and slowly moving the um, the heat gun around just to warm them up. I'm picking them up and then I am using the brush that was already in the medium that has been melted and start applying layer of wax. What you want to do is you want to start on an edge and then slowly move it so that you can coat the whole thing. And then I'm continuing this motion to do the next section and finally finish coating it. Here I'm taking the next panel, and I'm just doing the same thing. I chose to leave this on because sometimes things like this will happen, and it's always something that you can decide whether you want to continue or stop and get a different panel. So as you're working, you can definitely decide whether you want to move, not use this at all right now and think about it, or go ahead and just scrape off the excess wax that's there that gets a little lumpy. And you'll see me doing a lot of this where I'll just after I apply the encaustic medium to the panel, and I notice that the layers are kind of bumpy, like you can see that they're not just one surface. I go ahead and use my scraping tools to gently just start scraping the excess, and then I will go ahead and fuse. Um, Sometimes when you're scraping, you get the excess wax on your tool, and because it's still it doesn't have any residue of other things, you can just take that and put it back into your batch of wax that you are already warming up to be able to use. So you'll see me doing quite a little bit of that as I work. The other thing I wanted to show you here is that you don't need to get scraping tools like the ones I have. I like this process of this kind of work, so I do have invested money in many tools. But you can use something like a razor blade and use that to scrape your tools. You just hold it up and just start gently scraping, and you'll figure out what feels right for you. Now that I've done all this different scraping of the excess wax, I am taking my heat gun and I am fusing. One thing to keep in mind is that when you fuse, you wanna try to fuse it in the direction opposite of the way that you applied it. And one new trick that I have recently learned in order for you to get a really smooth surface is to take your heat gun and just move it really slowly in that whatever direction you're going, and then go back again. And this kind of movement allows for a much smoother surface later on, which is really helpful for some of the work that you'll be seeing later on today. So as I was looking at the panel, I realized that there's some bumps on the surface. So I just went ahead and took my scraping tool and started just um, gently scraping off the excess of the encaustic medium or the wax. So I continue this scraping and looking at it, putting the excess medium back into the batch. I then went ahead and added another layer of wax. So remember, because it was already fused, that it's already set and binded to the layer below, which is the panel. So as I apply the next layer of wax, I'm going to try to remember to rotate the panel so that it goes in a different direction from the previous one. And again, I'm going to try to go ahead and when I fuse it, to fuse it opposite of the way that I applied it. This just allows um, for a much even coating of the wax. In picking up my scraping tool, I noticed that there was dry wax left over, so I put it on top of the griddle just to melt away the excess wax, and then I went ahead and grabbed a paper towel to wipe that down. I am repeating the same method that you saw previous, and um, because I saw some extra wax that wasn't flat enough, I went ahead and scraped it off. You can do this before or after you fuse, but I kind of like to do it before I fuse That way, I feel that I get a much even coating of the wax afterwards. Again, I wanted to demonstrate that you can do this with a razor blade, um, and you just basically repeat this process. And a lot of the pieces with Encaustics is that you are repeating a lot of these because you are building one layer on top of another. But the thing to always remember is that each layer does need to get fused in between. Otherwise, they will not bind together. Here I am trying to show you as I fuse my panel, there is a level of shimmery that you see, or you can actually see it getting, it looks like it's getting wet in some ways, like there's moisture in there, and that is the wax melting. You want to do it lightly so that you're able to see that shine as you're fusing it as you go in, and then you'll know that it's fused. You also want your heat gun to be slowly moving so that you're not stuck in one spot. Because what will happen is that the wax and the layers underneath will just start melting into each other, and it will look more like a puddle. And you want to try to avoid that because otherwise you're going to be moving the layers underneath, unless that's the what you're going for. But again, anytime you see any kind of fumes, you know that you've gone too far, and this is no longer a safe environment for you to breathe in that air. These are two new panels. They are thin wood with blue tape in the back so that I can keep the wax off of it. I am starting by heating my board with my heat gun. Now I am ready to apply a coat or a layer of encaustic wax to the board, slowly brushing it. These boards are fairly thin, so I have to be really careful not to drop it in as I did before. I am coating my second board. As you can see, the way that I am brushing the wax onto the board, it feels smoother. I think there's a whole process about just kind of warming up and feeling the materials, and then kind of allowing yourself to just move around and do things more instinctually. There was a piece of bristle on the panel, so I removed it with a tweezer. I must have noticed something that I wanted to point out, but right now I can't remember what that was. I am now scraping with my razor blade and removing the excess wax. Sometimes when you don't take off the excess wax, it kind of clumps up on it, and then as you're scraping it, it kind of just drops in certain areas and creates a big lump. So it's a good idea to clean off your blade or your scraper often as you're seeing the wax build up. I continue to do this. I also do some rotating of the board just so that I can continue with the flow in the same motion. It's time to fuse it, so I am going. You can see a little bit how it darkens as I apply the heat gun to the panel. Now I'm trying to go on a straight line without really stopping, just a smooth movement. I do want to be able to have the panels to have a really smooth surface. Once they've been fused, I realized that they're still pretty warm and they're a little too warm to add another layer of wax. So I've decided to put them to the side and work on the smaller mini panels that are made from encaustic board. I am starting the process of heating the board again before I add the layers of wax. I am gently applying a layer of wax. This this brush is kind of big for this, but it seems to work okay. With the smaller pieces, I know that I have to be a little extra careful not to get my fingers on the wax, which can be easy to do. It's gonna be warm. It's not gonna burn you, but it's not a good idea to get it on your hands. The same scraping process is done here as well. I am taking my time with the small panels and using the razor blade to scrape and rotate it so that I can still scrape in the same direction. I am taking my time with the fusing. I do one board followed up by the next one, as there's enough room to place them both on the surface at the same time. I noticed a piece of dust or speck on it, so I just grabbed a pin and removed them. Here I am repeating the process, cleaning the tool as I go along, the scraping tool, so the wax does not get built up. I let the mini panel sit for a little bit, and I am to work with the larger pieces. I am removing some spots that I noticed with a pin and lightly fusing just to warm them up a bit before I apply another layer of wax. Another layer of wax is applied to the panel, being careful not to drop it again. As I put them down, I notice that there are big lumps of wax residue on top. My scraping tool had a lot of wax on it, so I put it into the griddle just to warm it up, to warm up the wax and remove it with a paper towel. Now it's ready to uh, remove the excess wax from the board. When I heated the tool, I also want to make sure it doesn't heat up too much because of the metal. Uh, if you use that metal to go back onto the board, it'll just make a big indent on it because it would be too hot and it would melt the wax. The scraping continues between layers just to make sure that I am getting a smooth surface. I gently fuse the board with the Encaustic gun. I decide to let the bigger boards sit for a little bit as I work on the smaller ones. Here I notice that the razor blade is has too much wax on it that's dried, and it will not really work on the surface of the board. So I heated it up in the on the griddle just a touch, just to remove the excess wax, and then wiped it off with a paper towel. Once again, you don't want these tools to get too hot because then you're gonna get marks that you might not want onto your panel after all the layers you have placed on it. I will continue this process until I have acquired enough layers. I'm really looking for two, most likely three layers of encaustic wax on my board before I really start doing other work on it. Here, my apologies for the angle of the camera, but what I'm doing here is I am arranging my working space to be able to do an image transfer. I have set out some images that were laser prints um, in black and white laser prints of um, both Frankie and Gian. I have just heated up the panel. Okay, here we'll be working on the process of making an image transfer. So I have set aside a couple of images that were printed on a laser printer in black and white setting. The images were flipped before they got printed, so it looks more like a mirror image of the actual image. The Once you have selected your image, you will be putting it on the panel that has layers of wax. This one has about 3 layers of wax. I'm trying to figure out the placement from it because I can see right through it, as probably you can. Once I figure out where it's gonna go, I put it down, gently push it down with my fingers, um, and then I take my burnishing tool and start burnishing it all around. I start in the middle and I work my way to the sides. I go at this slowly. Um, I know it looks really fast from the movements, but you really want to make sure you get the toner that is on the paper. This is binding the toner to the wax. You can also use a, a like a like a like a metal spoon to do this. I happen to have a burnishing tool. If you do use a spoon, make sure it's something that you dedicated to this process so you're not cross contaminating your food stuff with your artwork. Once I feel like the image has been burnished and is on in place on the panel, I now spritz it with a bottle of spray of water and I gently rub it. As I rub the image, it will slowly start to dissolve the paper. And I continue this process slowly uh, and go through. Okay, the camera fell in the last image, so luckily it did not land in the wax. Um, here I continue the process I was sharing with you before, which is doing an image transfer on a panel that has been coated with about 3 layers of wax. I have burnished the image onto the panel using a burnishing tool. Then I added water to moisten the paper with a spray bottle. And then now I am just gently rubbing the top of it or the back of it so to remove all the paper fibers, and the only thing that will remain is the toner, which will reveal the image once it's finished. I continue the process of rubbing. I noticed that I didn't burnish the edges of the of the paper because there was no toner on them. So I'm gently holding the image with one hand and ripping apart the excess paper. So then I know what is left and the areas that I need to focus on. This will create a lot of fibers that you gently brush off. You want to make sure that to be careful because you don't want these fibers to end up in your in the encaustic wax that you have melted to the side. So you go at it really carefully. You will add more. You'll spray more water to it if it seems like it's dry. Here I am using just one finger to just show you that you know I'm trying to be really gentle with it. It is easy. It is very easy to rip the toner and for it to come apart. So here I am just gently rubbing the excess. You'll see that the parts that are just white, which do not have toner on it, will just come off and it'll look clear. And then the pieces and the parts that have the toner on it are the parts that will stay. This process takes some time. You just gotta be patient and go at it slowly and gently. And maybe listen to some music or just get into the groove. But just take your time with it. You want to remove all the paper fibers that are left over, and so they don't go into your bath of encaustic medium. I have cleaned off a lot of the excess, and here I am continuing because I still see a lot of white spots on it. So the image of Gian came out pretty well. I am now going to use my next board to do the one of Frankie. Um, I'm rubbing with my hands to remove any residue, but I'm also noticing that the board is still warm, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to cool it down, checking the temperature. You want it to be a little warm. You don't want it to be hot because if it is very hot, what will happen is that the paper fibers will go into the wax and you will not be able to remove them to make the image transfer. So I am using the back of my arm just to test it, just like that of a baby's forehead. So I'm working on the image of Frankie, and I am going to turn it over, align it on my panel, seeing where the edges of it are. I am trying to find the placement, and now I can gently start burnishing it with my burnishing tool. I will take my time with this, going back and forth, starting from the center, in this case to the top, and then working my way to the bottom. And I do this many times, just going back and forth, making sure I am really covering the areas that have the toner. I switch directions and continue to burnish. Burnishing is really important because it's what will bind the toner to the wax. Remember, there are about 3 layers of wax, and each layer is fused in between. I will continue burnishing until I feel like I have a good coverage of the image. Remember, you can always use a spoon instead of a burnishing tool if you don't have one. Now that I feel that I've done enough burnishing, I have sprayed the top with water and now I'm gently rubbing. You can see the fibers of the paper starting to come off. I will continue this process until the black toner is revealed. This process can take a while, but it is one that is worth it. One thing that you might experience as you're going through this is that you can really start connecting to the piece, connecting to the image as you rub it back and forth, and slowly allow for the fibers of the paper to come off. More water is sprayed on just to moisten the paper as it was getting dried, but it's a very rhythmic motion. I really would recommend for you to really get into just that piece and rub it and gently look at it and just feel your way through it. This is one of the ways that I do connect to the pieces of work that I do, especially those of Frankie and of Gian. Here we're coming to the end of this process with this image. There's a few more fibers left on the transfer. Some of the edges of the print did come off. That could be because it didn't have enough burnishing on the edges or because I rubbed too hard. I am sorry that I am off camera, but what I decided to do is to put a thin layer of Encaustics on top of the image of Gian. Here we have added a thin layer of Encaustic medium with a fan brush. I have decided to use the smaller, less powerful heat gun And here I am just carefully moving the heat around. I know from experience that the toner itself can move, so I'm trying to do this delicately, just gently putting on some, fusing it a little bit, trying to slowly move the heat around with small passes. As I look at the image, I have gone too far. You will see that when I lift up the image, the panel, the GM's hair has melted a little bit, so it has distorted the image altogether. I will have a decision to make whether I continue with this or let it go. I have decided for Frankie's image to not put wax on it, so I am lightly fusing the just the toner to as I heat it, I can see that some of the paper fibers are melting into the wax. I'm trying to really go at it at this really slow as I want to keep that image intact. The edges, the bottom edges of Frankie have pulled apart somewhat, but I think that happened when I actually did the rubbed off the excess paper from the transfer. I have been paying close attention just to allow for a little bit of shimmer in that melting of the wax. It's kind of like you're painting and brushing the air onto it. I am taking my time with this, moving the heat away and letting it cool down just slightly and coming back to it. I am looking at the images again, trying to show you Gian's face that it has shifted. Frankie stayed pretty much intact. I can also see there's a little piece in her face that has been a little bit discolored, but other than that, it looks pretty good. Here we're going to be working with the mini boards, which have about 3 layers of encaustic wax on them, and each layer has been fused in between. I have, I believe it's called a spider orchid, which was a plant that was received from a friend. I pressed the the flowers once they were almost ready to come off and kept them. So I thought that this might be a good project to show you how to embed a flower onto your panel. So what I have done is I have heated the board. I'll pick up my flower, figure out the direction and the framing of it. I am also thinking that it's possible I might make this into a mini book. So I am thinking about the edges, if I need to punch some holes. I'm taking the flower and I'm gently pressing it with my fingers, feeling my way through it, not too hard, but some steady, firm pressure is applied to this one, mostly because the flower can handle it. I have a piece of parchment paper, which I am going to use to burnish. So this tool is a spatula, which is made out of wood, and I am doing this a similar process that I did before, which is I'm starting from the middle and just working my way to push the flower down. You can use a credit card. You can use other things that are not too hard or sharp um, on it to do this process. You can use something that's flat, I guess. Just you can experiment and play around with the stuff that you have at your home. I'm trying to see whether it feels like it's in there. I feel like it has gotten to a place where it's nicely embedded in there. I am taking my fan brush and I am coating the top of the flower, really focusing on the flower, not necessarily the whole panel, and adding wax to it. I'm trying to do a thin layer of it at this point. This panel has the thin layer of encaustic on it that I put on with a fan brush. I am contemplating whether to put it to the side and work on the other side or the other piece, but I ultimately decide to go ahead and fuse it. This panel has been fused. I'm going to set it to the side, also allowing it to cool down a little bit before I do more work on it. And now I'm going to work on the other panel that again has the 3 layers of wax. I am going to just slightly warm up the panel to receive the image. The image is one of Frankie when she was pretty much a toddler, and we were over at the gardens in St. John the Divine up in 110th Street, and she started smelling the flowers. I might have asked her to see if she wanted to smell them, and this is what she did. I'm not too worried about this piece in the sense that the panel was warm and the the encaustic that was underneath is going to start seeping on there. I was worried about this before when I was working on the transfer. This this process, I want to be able to bind the rice paper with the encaustics. So I do want that level of absorption to happen. I then put on the parchment paper and I'm using the wood burnishing tool to just gently burnish it down. And I'm taking my time with it. I start from the middle like I did before. Um, I'm also checking to see how the flower image is doing and whether it has cooled down at this point. This particular piece also has the edges of the paper hanging over it, and I did that on purpose so that I don't have to worry too much about the alignment uh, onto the board, and that way I can do what I'm doing next, which is to cut the excess off um, of the piece. And I'll do this. I'm taking an X-Acto knife and I'll just gently go around it and make sure that I cut out those pieces. I did use the cutting mat to remove the excess paper, and then I clean off whatever the residue was. What I have just done is I have heated the paper or the image from the top to warm it up like I have been doing before. And I am again using my fan brush to put in a thin layer of wax. I don't want too much of it at this point. I just want them to be able to connect together. I am going ahead and fusing this panel and just going back and forth slowly and evenly. I'm trying to maintain a smooth surface. I am setting the image of Frankie off to the side for a few moments just to kind of cool down a little bit and do its thing. Now what I'm doing is I'm picking up the other panel, checking the temperature, feeling my way through to see whether it might need another layer of wax. I'm heating it up once again and adding another layer of wax. This time I'm going through the whole panel and trying to do an even coat all across the whole surface. Remember, these are really fairly small. They're 2.5 by about 3.5, and I'm repeating the process. I check to see whether the other panel, the one that hosts the image of Frankie, has is cool enough or still a touch warm rather. And I'm doing the same thing. I am adding another layer of wax, a thin layer with a fan brush. The fan brush is especially good for this process because you can put small bits of wax rather than a much thicker coating that which is what you get from the Haki brush. Um, I am fusing the panels. These two mini panels are now complete. I am going to just set them to the side.